Welcome to Money Talks, a series of outstanding presentations from the Centennial Anniversary Convention of the American Numismatic Association, held in August 1991 in Chicago.
Good afternoon. I'm going to repeat something that I said last night. Many of you have been at the Educational Forum, and I said it then, and I want to say it now. It is very, very exciting to have audiences, numismatists and people that are really interested in knowledge and the fun out of knowledge, to come to events that are educational, and certainly the World Series, which many of you attended, was packed, and everybody enjoyed the questions. We found out how much we didn't know, and we were shocked at what other people did know, and it was really an exciting mental experience. The same thing has been true of the numismatic theater. The numismatic theater used to have a very, very small attendance. And due to the hard work of John Burns and of Jim Taylor, this numismatic theater has become a delight for people to come and to enjoy what some of the speakers are able to present. This is a real breakthrough for knowledge of numismatics, and that is the only thing that is the permanent pleasure that numismatics can give to any of us. So I thank all the ANA for creating this and sticking by it so that you could enjoy it. My topic for today has given me the chance to look for needles in haystacks, principally because I didn't have a metal detector that would pick up needles in haystacks, but I've had a lot of fun doing it. Now, the dollar sign is something that has been written on. I believe there are probably 10 articles in the Numismatists on the subject and other articles everywhere, and each one is pushed a little farther forward and wondered when a solution would be found to what it really was. Now, I want to give you a trace of why you shouldn't use logic in historical matters. It's nice to use logic, but you can certainly be wrong. Now, the dollar sign for about 100 years in this country was certainly assumed to be nothing more than U.S. with the bottom of the U eliminated, and everything was fine. And then the religious group felt that it should come from in hoc signo, the I, H, S, and a few of the lines in that eliminated. There were others who felt that it came from the two vertical lines which were parallel, came from the Spanish pillar dollar of 1732 and onward from there, or from and that the S was the ribbon which goes as part of that design with the plus ultra representing that there's more beyond Gibraltar. So these were some of the primary assumptions as to what the dollar sign came from. All of them, of course, have no basis, and therefore we have to find what the real solution is. Now, I want to bring you up to what was found by prior research. Most of the work was done by Florian Cajori, a professor who was at one time at Colorado College, right next to the ANA headquarters, and he eventually moved to Berkeley in California, where he taught mathematics. And a lot of he wrote approximately 5 articles amending each time what he had found before. So even he was correcting his own work during his lifetime, and that was 50, 60 years ago when he stopped working on the matter. Now, to bring up the notion that that the dollar sign was an easy thing to determine, he came out originally with the idea that the peso, which means weight in Spanish, but became the denomination of the main Spanish full-size coin, the 8 reales, and called the Spanish dollar, and which was, of course, the basis for trading activities in the early American colonies. And as you may know, the dollar was adopted by Maryland in 1767 as the basic governmental money of Maryland, and that was its first use officially. It had been used unofficially in trade transactions long before that in the colonies. So Florian determined that the word peso, written with a P and with an S, and with flourishes and different types of handwriting, were the basis for the dollar sign. This is still true. And the question was, when and how was the dollar sign developed? And that was the difficulty. Now, in addition to Florian's work, after he had produced that, he had had a New Orleans group who undertook to develop a sort of goodwill for New Orleans out of Oliver Pollock. Oliver Pollock was an Irishman who came to America. He came to Philadelphia, and Robert Morris of Willing and Morris, which was their trading firm, gave Oliver Pollock an opportunity to go to the West Indies to trade various commodities, and outfitted a ship for him. Pollock did that for a few years, lived in Havana, learned Spanish, and then came to New Orleans. And poor Oliver Pollock ended up there during the Revolutionary War with instructions to get the United States in control of as much of the Mississippi Valley or the West as could be done. So he had many transactions during the Revolutionary War, and he used up all of his own money for the government, borrowed money on behalf of himself in order to run the government's affairs, and strangely enough, poor guy, the government didn't pay him after the war, even though he was the official agent of the United States, primarily because the government didn't have the money. But he had used this so-called peso sign, and he then requested in a number of written pieces of material to the Congress to be repaid. And he used a sign which they interpreted as the dollar sign, which was a PS. I'll show you all of this in a moment. So they got lost, as some historians often do, in trying to promote Oliver Pollock and Louisiana as the basis of the dollar sign. So this was great goodwill for down there, and sort of all of a sudden then they found the manuscript notes taken at the Provincial Congress of New York in 1776 by Ezra Lomidou, a representative from New York, and lo and behold, in the middle of 1776, he was using a so-called dollar sign in taking the notes, and that was then an American source. So I knew that there had to be other sources somewhere, and therefore, let's look at the background of the development of the dollar sign, and first we have to go to Portugal. Portugal developed this dollar sign. May we have the lights off? In counting, one has a very substantial problem. Here is a very, very early, this is 1400, where in writing Roman numerals, you have a terrible problem with Roman numerals. You have to write them in a horizontal way, and yet there's no way of putting in separator symbols so that you know what kind of a number you're reading. So the early Portuguese and Spanish figures in books is a U. That is a looping U, and that meant 1,000. So they established that. Now that just meant that as a separator, that beyond on the right was the lower numbers, the three numbers that would constitute 1,000. If they were all zeros, then you'd indicate that. And then this is another type of thousand symbol. This loop over the top meant that the number underneath was 1,000. And that was developed in Portugal until now we get to the switchover from the Roman numerals to the Arabic numerals. Now, I just have to say this about the Arabs. Their mathematical genius in the early period to create a zero was one of the wonderful things that they were able to conceive. So in early mathematics, that use of a zero was marvelous. So then they were using zeros, and that made Arabic numbers much more acceptable than other types of numbers. So here is a typical number where the Portuguese now have adopted Arabic numbers with a U to indicate the 1,000 symbol, so that the three numbers following here are the 100 and the 10 and the unit, and the numbers on the left side are 1,000. Now, as that developed, there were efforts to shortcut this. And in Lisbon in 1709, here is 3,588, and the 1,000 symbol is now getting a flourish. Instead of it being a U, they wrap a little loop around the top of the U, and then we come to a further development in 1711, and now you see a loop for a U with two horizontal pieces over the top. Now this is known in Portuguese as the cifra. The word cipher in English means zero or code. It has a number of interpretations. But cipher is an Arabic word, and this is their fundamental contribution to this. So to make a cipher augmented or enlarged, the effort was made to put two strokes through this U, and therefore you're dividing the cipher into three parts, so that means 3 zeros. This is very curious because in Portuguese, when you say cifra and you make this enlarged, it's cifron. And therefore, cifron means a larger zero, which means the 3 zeros. And so in Portugal, when you wrote this symbol for 1,000, you then wrote it with a loop and 2 lines. Now look how this is beginning to develop. By 1761, now they have a total loop, something like a zero with 2 strokes going down, and we are getting the beginning of a dollar sign. Now, while this was going on, we now find that Portugal was using the English pound for someone, and this is written in Portugal, covering the English pound. And now you have an L, the normal pound signal with a horizontal line, which they make as a squiggly line, and therefore they find that instead of using the slash, which the English were using when they had pounds, shilling, and pence, pounds, shillings, pence, they were using two little commas in between those. And the Portuguese, in copying this system, they're in their lower situation. My battery's run out. I won't rely on that. Not my battery, this battery. So the Portuguese began to think about using two dots to separate out. But then now they decided that it was best to hang in there with 1,000. So in 1766, they were still using a loop with two stripes going down it for the 1,000 symbol. And you can see how that changes depending upon what the particular scribe who's making that decides for the moment. And by the time we get here to the 16,250, we already have an S loop with two stripes, and by 1783, an S with the two stripes going diagonally to write 9,000. Now the Portuguese developed this without too much influence from the outside. And this is their first paper money. Look in the upper right of the piece on the left, and you will see the 1797 money of Portugal with 10,000 reis, and the dollar sign as we know it used in that particular denomination. And here is a close-up of a 1798 piece with 2,400 written there in the development of the Portuguese style. Now Portugal had, of course, its Joes and half-Joes in circulation in America, but this still was not influencing America. I want to show you what the Portuguese did. Stylistically, everybody puts all kinds of additions to style. There is a typical note of a little later Portugal in the early 19th century, and you see in the upper right how that's called the cifrón is still, that so-called dollar sign is now getting pretty fancy. And here on the right-hand side, we have a topless cifrón. You notice the upper stroke of the S, which previously existed in the Portuguese money, has now been abandoned for the moment because it was easier to engrave it that way. Now a little further along the line in the upper right, you will see how the dollar sign has been redeveloped back to the normal one of 1797, and as all engravers sometimes do, they get their S backwards, so on the 19,200 denomination here blown up, the S was reversed by the engraver, and of course Portugal had to abandon that issue. So as Portugal developed into the 19th century, the stylizing of the dollar sign changed again for them, so that they had the two vertical elements over the S sticking out over the top and under the bottom, and then on the 20,000 piece and on the 2,500 piece, the lines are kept inside the S. Then Portugal got into inflation, and because they had to issue money in such high denominations as I've just shown you, the inflation got out of control, and Portugal passed a law in 1911, confirmed by an edict of 1913, that no longer did the cifrón dollar sign mean 1,000, they were changing its meaning, and they changed it to escudo. Now it has become a spacer in between the number of escudos and the centavos following that. So this is 2 escudos 50. And then that meant that they've abandoned the 1,000 meaning entirely, and it now means escudos. Well, on the later 20th, or the 20th century money, in this situation, we now see 1,000 escudos and 2 zeros, and then escudos 1,000, so that the escudo is in front of the number and in back of the number, but the escudo sign stays in the middle. Now, before I leave Portugal, I wanted to tell you a little something. We have a very unusual situation in the English language, and you all are so used to it, you don't think about it. English is read from left to right. Arabic, Hebrew, and other languages are read from right to left. What are the exceptions in the English language with respect to reading from left to right, where we read from right to left? Well, of course, it's our dollar sign. When we read $100, we don't read $100, which is the way it's written. So for convenience, we have, and we think nothing of it and read it instantaneously, we read backwards so that the Hebrew and the Arabic system has to be adopted by us momentarily as we pass through that part of the language. The pound sign is read similarly, and the yen sign. All of this is moving that sign to the left side of a number instead of the right. Now we are leaving Portugal because we've seen their development, and we don't know how much Portugal affected everybody else. So let's go to Spain. In Spain, when they wrote pesos, they wrote a simple P, and then an S, and sometimes an O. Now the S must be the S from peso and not the plural of pesos. So as you see in the beginning and the development of the symbol for peso, there is, to make the P, there is a stroke of the pen that comes down from the top, loops at the bottom, upward from the top, from the bottom to the top, and then a little P loop, and then they swing into an S in one way or another. The S being put in any position that is convenient. You notice on the right-hand side, Mexico City and Manila and New Orleans, where it's still peso. And our pesos, there was no distinction between singular and plural. Now, Oliver Pollock had records of his trading when he came to New Orleans. On the left, you will see what was in his records in making the peso sign or the dollar sign. Now it's become a flourish with the P and the S, but now we have to be tremendously careful because the man that wrote, the Pollock, who was could write very well, had scribes doing his bookkeeping, and we have to be careful that anything that was written with his name at the bottom was written by him, or whether it was a scribe somewhere else. They had secretaries and trained accountants who could write, and they would be the ones whose writing we read, and therefore all of the New Orleans promotion of Mr. Pollock's use of a dollar sign is completely undermined because he didn't write it. The scribes wrote it, or somebody else copied it, and it's copied from a letter that was sent to someone else. Now we have a typical Oliver Pollock piece of 1780. This is in his handwriting, and you will notice that this is the 6,146 is a large P with a wiggle sort of an S at the right-hand top. So that was the way he really wrote it, and fortunately we've been able to find one of his letters in his own writing. Now, how were other people writing at this time? They were beginning to keep books and write letters to collect money, and on the left you will see several dollar signs, and in these cases they're now abandoning the top loop of the P. They are having a downstroke for the P and an upstroke, and then swinging right into the S immediately. There are 3 of those on the left-hand portion, each a little different. Again, these are by scribes. And now I've enlarged it over here, and you can see these strokes with a loop at the bottom of the P and an S on top of it, looking very much like a dollar sign. Now the question of whether a dollar sign meant peso is proven by what's on the left. Pollock, in his correspondence, was reporting that he had captured the ship Rebecca in the estuary of the Mississippi River. And that ship was captured by Spanish cooperation in the Revolutionary War, taken from the English. When a group of private people did that, they got paid. In this letter, it says that Pollock wanted to pay them $4,750 for the money in exchange for the boat. But that they felt that this was too little, that the boat was worth more than that, and they wanted the $5,500. And so look at the symbols. The top symbol is in the one style of S with a line through it, and the bottom is in peso style, and this is by the same man, a couple of lines apart, writing. So now we see people are writing both styles of the dollar sign and the peso sign in one individual letter. On the right-hand side, we see the man who's using $130, but using the dollar sign after the number, which is the way we say it, and which was reasonably common by those who weren't used to doing it the other way. Now we go on, and here on the left is a Puerto Rican sale of a slave. And now you see a very, very interesting problem. Whether the S is a plural or whether it's peso. Now we see the Spanish method of making a plural. You notice in the one on the left that there are 2 symbols following the number, and that was the way you say pesos, pesos, or dollars, dollars. Now in Spanish, they have developed a very curious custom of making a plural. Many of you are familiar with that. When you get a letter from written in Spanish to you here, the abbreviation for Estados Unidos, the United States, is EEUU. And similarly, Ferrocarriles, the railroad, is abbreviated FFCC. And similarly, Fuerzas Armadas, excuse my Spanish, it's for FFAA. In other words, they double up the letters, just as the Polynesians did with Pango, Pango, and Bora, Bora, and everything like that too. They use a doubling up to get a plural. So now from that doubling up, we realize that the S is for peso in the symbol and was not for the plural. That then they wanted to use a plural. They used a double letter, and isn't it interesting that the double letter is different in the first stylized form in which it's written from the second. Now on the right, we have another curious 1782 Spanish item, and this is written by the clerk for Governor Miro of Louisiana. And look at the top. 65,000 and so forth pesos. And there is the old-fashioned P and the high S, and then cinco reales. And now we have the R for reales at the lower part and swing into a big S. So now they're using the S as a plural hanging up top. So as you know, there are 8 reals to the peso, and therefore the top one indicates that they're pluralizing reales and they're using the old-fashioned PS. And in the same letter, they go on to mention another number, and now we have the doubling up again, and we have the P with an S above it, and to its right, a virtual dollar sign with a large S taking the place of a little s and 2 lines through it. So now we see what it means when they tried to do a plural. Having established that in the southern part of America, and I must explain to you that you realize that the land west of the Mississippi River was transferred from the French at the end of the French and Indian War to the Spanish, who weren't in the war, but in order to take it away from the French, the British had no say in the matter. So, the British had the say in the matter because they won the French and Indian War, and instead of taking it for themselves, they took all the land east of the Mississippi River and gave the west of the Mississippi River to Spain, because that had some political horse trading going on with respect to other territories. So that is why the United States began using Spanish money symbols more and more, because Spain owned the land west of the Mississippi River and dominated New Orleans as a port. On the left, I mentioned previously that Ezra Lomidou was using the Spanish symbol for dollars and during the meetings of the Provincial Congress of New York. As you know, New York had been run out of New York City by the British during the Revolutionary War, and in 1776, this meeting was held in White Plains, and eventually they had to move to Fishkill, and they moved up the Hudson River in order to continue New York things. And this diary shows how many different forms a particular individual will use for writing the pesos, and how the dollar sign must have been known to him, even though he was a New Yorker as a lawyer and a Yale graduate and an educated person, but he had done a lot for that symbol. Then I had a little problem. How am I going to find some earlier period dollar signs? And so I finally learned that there was a letter book that began in 1768 from Manchac, Louisiana. Manchac is a swamp which almost flows into the Mississippi River, where you work your way through the bayous other than by way of the Mississippi River, and can jump into the Mississippi River at a higher point, and so forth. So a letter book is when you write a commercial letter, as you know, you write the letter and send off the original. There were no mechanisms for copying that letter at that time that were sufficient to transfer it. There are a number of ways of transferring, but at least in Louisiana and the crude parts of America, you employed a scribe to copy your letter onto your letter book so that you knew what you said to the other fella and wrote him. So this letter book has a number of different scribes in it. And so we can't be handwriting experts and determine which scribes were writing which ones, but the man who wrote the letter wasn't the one who was the sender and the composer of the letter, and so we have that interesting problem. So here on the right are the various forms in which the scribes are beginning to shortcut the dollar sign. Now you notice beginning at the top how simple the S now becomes with a stripe, and as you work your way down, they're writing it faster and faster as they have more numbers, and this group of scribes were just putting two lines up and down with some kind of a stroke across it. And these are the earliest dollar signs we have ever been able to find in America. Now let's look at the, excuse me, I'm going to try to I can't get off the platform because I'll run out of space. In 1770, this is a further development of how these things were going, but this now becomes a very clear dollar sign on the left in this 1770 letter, and in the one a little later in the same book, now the dollar sign we see is at the right-hand side, but it now looks more, that one looks more like a peso sign than a dollar sign. And then we go on, and this 1772 letter is very interesting because this scribe, in this same letter, makes his dollar sign in a quick manner up top, a little more developed in the middle, and then doesn't use the dollar sign at all and writes 159 and puts a DS above that, and then 6.5, and then he puts a squibble above that, supposed to be reales, and so here is $159, 6.5 reales, all in the same letter, and up above he's using the Spanish symbols. So you see how difficult it was to get that far. Now here is on the left is a letter of 1776, and it is one letter, and look at the different styles of dollar sign that is written by one man there. This is how it is beginning to develop and change in the slow course. But on the right is really a remarkable piece in a letter, and I was absolutely delighted to find this. Here a man was discussing sterling. He had to change 6 pounds, 5 shillings, 4 pence sterling. And now he writes his pounds with 2 strokes across, different from what the way it was done in England, but he likes the 2-stroke stylistic. And he says in his letter that it's exchanged at, and then he writes 4 shillings, 8 pence. The 4 with an S above it, slash an 8 pence with a D for pence above that, and then a complicated ST for sterling. He wants to show that 4 shillings, 8 pence sterling is the exchange per dollar. And therefore, look at that dollar sign to see how perfectly this is beginning to conform to what we've adopted. And then he concludes is $26.07. And he writes the dollar sign there, and again the R above. So you can see how complicated it was to convert from the English denomination to the Spanish denomination on the basis of the exchange method and ending up with the dollars. So when we learn to write, I hope we don't have complications of that sort. So that shows us how the writing was developed. Now the question of printing and what was going on. The old books, the books that have worked on this subject, have always said that in 1797 the first printed dollar sign took place. And that is in a little accounting book and mathematics book of Albany, New York in 1797. It's Lansingburg, across the way, part of Troy, and so on. And That's the way it appears in the book, and I want to show you its enlargement. This Reverend Chauncey Lee determined that each American symbol, which had been adopted and for the coinage in 1793 and onward by the early 1785 setting of standards, ought to have a representation. So in the first line, a slash, one slash meant 1 mil, 2 slashes meant 1 cent. Now you keep those 2 slashes and you cross it with a line, a curving line, and that makes a dime. And then you double that dime line, and I want to show you that in further detail, to make a dollar sign of his style, and then E for eagle, meaning $10. So he was taking each denomination, so to speak, and working that into his system. Nobody paid any attention to his system, but let's look at it on the left. The dollar sign that he uses is hollow in the middle. The 2 wiggly strokes have a closed area in between and are not an S because the top of it points upward and the bottom points downward, and that is and it's in the shape of a worm which has a strange point, but it looks exactly like a leech. I don't know if you are familiar with unfed leeches, but they're lovely little animals. They're coming back into the medical science today because they're able to drain blood out of particular places much better than doctors can. And so the leech is again getting back in its own. So you better get acquainted with the leech shape, which is there. So we looked at this book very carefully, and we find that every one of these dollar signs is different in the print. So they must have made each dollar sign that was placed in this letterpress printing separately. So I feel that this must be rejected as a dollar sign, even though it's a symbol for a dollar. It is not our dollar sign at all. It was just a side invention of this gentleman in 1797. Now, in Philadelphia, the type founders of Binney and Rollinson had reached a point that the use of the dollar sign was sufficient so that they would prepare it for printing. The existing books said that the earliest use of our real dollar sign was 1802. So, again, this is an opportunity for numismatic research. I found in going through all the books printed in America that I had to find those that were before 1802 because I knew that something had to happen before then. I found a book, the little pamphlet printed for the renewal of the Bank of North America by the state of Pennsylvania for their charter. And it was undated. But it said that, please, the Bank of North America is a wonderful organization and should therefore have its charter renewed. And so I found out when its charter was going to be renewed. That was needed for 1801. I found out that the legislature had to do this beforehand, and then in due course, I learned that where was the capital of Pennsylvania in the early period, and I find it's 1799. It had moved to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It had not gotten from Philadelphia to Harrisburg. So Philadelphia was the first capital, Lancaster the second, and Harrisburg the third. Who was the printer? A gentleman in Lancaster. And then I found a similar print of the same item in Harrisburg. So the politicians of were being handled beautifully. There was a newspaper published in Lancaster, a newspaper in Harrisburg. The boys at the Bank of North America wanted both parts of Pennsylvania to vote for the renewal of the charter. Therefore, they had two separate printers print the identical thing, and those printers bought apparently the first of the dollar signs for printing. And so they used them, and you see them as they were used in the application. The reason we know that this application is February 1799 is because that was when the propaganda was needed to get the legislature of Pennsylvania to take up the renewal of the charter. Now it's fascinating the difficulty with which the public had to accept the dollar sign in print. On the left, you will see an advertisement in a newspaper. On the top section, they're using other monies without a dollar sign, and in the lower section, they're using a dollar sign. Same newspaper, just different advertising and a choice of using one or the other. Here on the right is an advertisement not an advertisement. This is a government publication of 1802, and in the messages of the president, and now the government has decided in this particular situation to use the dollar sign at the end of a number. So where they're multiplying things out on the, let's take the third line, where they use at $5, and then they multiply that out to show what is being done. So now we're in a state of confusion as to the use of the dollar sign. When the French in Louisiana were still using the dollar sign in the area where I come from, St. Louis, they now are writing the dollar sign very readily, indicating dollars. And on the right-hand side, we are now seeing in 1807 that this advertisement for books has everything imaginable. They use the dollar sign sometimes, they use DLS, they use no signal at all, just leave a space for dollars and between dollars and cents, and don't even use the period. So everybody had their own method of using these signs. But the key was checks. How do you write all these things and have safety? So they didn't exactly know how to do this. So here are all the experiments with checks. First they decided the dollar sign would be convenient on the left, but the cent sign possibly being a fraction so as to handle it. So we have it on the left, on the right. Then some people on the second one on the left put a little symbol, double lines in each direction to keep the check from being raised and writing the word dollars. Sometimes the dollars was put at the end. On the lower left, you'll see where dollars is written at the end. The gentleman uses the dollar sign in the beginning, and he writes his check and uses the fraction and uses the dollar sign as a control so that nobody could add a long item to that. So this is the type of check that has been used. Now, a couple of funnies on the way to finishing the dollar sign. Arkansas is distinguished for having put out a private note with a dollar sign backwards, and that's pretty hard to do, to make it that big and have the proofreader miss that little technicality. But this is a nice early Civil War Arkansas note where the dollar sign is backwards. And then this coin detector on the right, this is a Cronenberg coin detector, which had iron casting for its base. You drop a coin into it and it'd tell you whether the coin was counterfeit or not by weighing it. But there they were successful in the casting process, both in using the old U.S. Because he thought that was right, but he got the S backwards, so he made a double mistake in casting this piece of iron, which is sort of fun. And finally, we have the banks began to use the dollar sign for the ornamental grill work on the left, and the latest fashion for the dollar sign is when children have their teeth straightened and the dollar sign can be placed right into the, on each tooth to hold the tooth and press it into place. Thank you very much. It's absolutely fascinating to hit a subject like this that is that has so many numismatic twists in it.
Cleopatra, William the Conqueror, Napoleon, Lincoln, Jefferson, and Washington. Coin collecting is history you can hold in your hands. It also is art, geography, finance, and fun. Coin collecting is an educational and entertaining activity for the entire family. For information on other video presentations and ANA education programs, phone 719-632-2646 or write to the American Numismatic Association, 818 North Cascade Avenue, Colorado Springs, Colorado, 80903-3279.